Oh, hey. Captain Kai Kai says, yo, could someone on the Knicks guard Tatum? Y'all knew no one could guard Tatum. Shut up. Okay. We're all good, chat. We're all good. Y'all want one? Yo, chat, my dogs had like 9 puppies. I was trying to give away one to y'all, but like y'all wasn't trying to have no Rottweilers, man. Y'all could have had one of Pluto's kids. Okay. All right. Let's see. So I'm done talking about that. Trippy don't get. Should I call Trippy? Chat, should I call Trippy? Or maybe not. Okay. All right. So we kind of talked about the Diddy trial. You want some updates? Let's do some updates on day one, right? We weren't there in court today, but my man Inner City Press was in court today. Let's give you a rundown of like how they're doing jury selection. You got to remember, first and foremost, when it comes to jury selection for Sean Diddy Combs, there was actually real conversation of people thinking that, yo, could he get a fair trial after all the details have been put out and all the stuff that's been leaked and all the press, right? Could he get a fair trial? Because could people show up not knowing his history, not being biased, not having an opinion already? Because that's what a jury needs to be, unbiased, and be able to hear the information in the trial and make up their mind for the first time. Okay, cool. Let's look at some of the stuff that was going on. Here we go. So it says, so now U.S. versus Sean Combs, selection day one. Here in the courtroom, Diddy's dressed in a formal dress. By the way, if you don't know, here's an interesting detail. So the judge had to make a ruling about this too. They say Diddy could have I think it's about 6 or 7 outfits. He's allowed to groom himself in a certain way. From what people who are familiar with the court process says, it's nothing too outrageous, but they made sure Diddy could be suited and booted. Because, of course, at times the prosecutor could be like, hey, listen, we don't think that they should have or be funded for a certain amount of, outfits for court and this and third. And remember, when it comes to you being on trial, the main thing is that the jury is not prejudiced by you being in a prison blues or you being in a jail outfit and you handcuffed. So Diddy's not going to be handcuffed in the courtroom. Of course, there's bailiffs at every entrance or exit. And he's going to not have on prison clothes. He's going to have on regular clothes. He's going to be a suit. And let me see if we can find the details of that. Okay. Here we go. So in Sean Diddy Combs' sex trial, the judge approved several requests from the defense team, including allowing him to wear his own clothes and permitting, so his own clothes would mean maybe his own tailor could go get nice suits for him as opposed to, court assigned or approved or paid for cheap suits. So he's going to be able to wear his own clothes and permitting a psychiatrist to testify about the potential drug effects and blackouts. Remember, Diddy's still trying to say, yo, I ain't going to lie. Sometimes I was blacking out. I was tweaking, right? So the judge has also denied the defense request for a delay, citing sufficient time for the defense to prepare. Okay, cool. So we know he could wear whatever he wants to wear. So he showed up in formal dress, wearing reading glasses, and has 8 lawyers. Okay? Let's keep it going. It says, all rise. This is what the judge says. I have composed a list of prospective jurors who, based on their questionnaire answers, I don't propose to do individual Q&A with. The list of people and place is so long. I thought it was an appendix to the Lord of Rings. I don't know if this is good or bad for Diddy. The judge got jokes. Holy. The judge got jokes, people. The judge got jokes. Say it ain't so. So the judge already cracking a Lord of Rings jokes. The assistant U.S. attorney says, why don't we have the next jury in line review the binder with the court staff to save that time? Judge says, okay. Says, we've given 2 copies of the binder to your staff, and the judge says, we'll soon get a thumbs up when the jurors are ready. It says, I think it's sufficient for me, this is what the judge is saying, to say here on the record that there will be times a juror has a privacy concern about assault or trauma, and it would be appropriate to address that at a sidebar with the transcript sealed. Basically meaning if someone who was a victim of some type of assault or some type of traumatic event that might coincide with what Diddy is being accused of, if the questions that because in jury selection, you get to ask them questions like, hey, have you ever purchased a Diddy CD? Now, they might be like, oh, yeah, I have. For the prosecutor, they might be like, oh, well, you might like him. Or, they might ask a follow-up question. Well, do you like his music or are you endearing to him? You wouldn't want to bias person on the jury. So these questions help determine who's going to be biased or not. So here's the thing. It says, so if someone has been a victim of some of the things Diddy's been accused of, the judge is saying we should address these things, but we should go off the record. Now, in a court case, everything should be on the record unless it raises a few different circumstances, one including problems with safety and security. So if someone's a victim and they got abused and you ask them, hey, you're here for the Diddy trial, did you ever get abused? If they got to talk about that, right, because they could ask them more questions. All right, when you got abused, did the person ever fly you across state? It might be invasive. So they want to seal those things. Okay, so the judge mentions that. The judge says, I understand that's how it was done in the Maxwell case. Wow, that's interesting. So it looks like the judge is kind of following by the rule book of saying what happened in the Ghislaine Maxwell case should be applicable to Diddy, which, by the way, for Diddy, that shouldn't bowl too well, okay? AUSA agreed. The judge also said there's a logistic issue that we have to work out. If we have to seal the transcript, no one, including Mr. Combs, can see it. So what if we leave it in the transcript? The jurors, it says, since the jurors are not identified by name, the defense says let us confer with the government. So they're trying to figure out how are they going to, take things out of the case without interrupting the case, right? So there's going to be things. So at a certain point, probably on a weekly basis, we're going to get transcripts of all the hearings. So for today's hearing, there's going to be a transcript next week, like Monday. So whoever was a stenographer, she's typing it up, and eventually she's going to submit to the clerk, barring anything that the judge ruled as to be redacted or barring any privacy concerns raised by the AUSA or the defense. They're going to have some redactions, and then it'll get public for anybody to look up. So, cool. It says, at the sidebar, what was the court going to tell its jurors about the level of confidentiality? Because I asked if the jurors believe this will be entirely confidential, and that relates to candor. The judge says, I'm not going to lie to the jurors, okay? It then goes on to say, the judge says, this is a criminal case. The United States versus Sean Combs. I expect the trial to run for about approximately 8 weeks. The justice depends on all of you. You've all filled out long questionnaire, and in a few minutes I'll ask more. The judge then continues by saying if during the process you would prefer to answer a question not in open court, but it was sensitive, we'll do it out of an earshot. The transcript will be visible only to the parties themselves. So the judge has now made this ruling saying the transcript, which usually we see the transcript for everything, he's going to clearly seal the transcript and probably only allow the parties, which means the prosecutor and the defense, to see it in case they want to make an appeal or they want to bring it up later, but they will not allow it for public consumption. Your answers allow for preemptory challenges. The judge also says, let me give you a brief summary of the case. This is one defendant on trial, Sean Combs, a.k.a. Puff Daddy, Diddy, other names, and Love. He's pled not guilty, and he's presumed to be innocent. There are 5 counts: racketeering conspiracy, kidnapping, sex trafficking for prostitution, which is 2 victims, and male commercial sex workers. Okay? He denied all of it. Our schedule is to be ready for May 12th, which basically they're saying in a week. They want to be ready next Monday for trial. So they're hoping to take this entire week for jury selection. The first week we're going to go 9:30 to 5. Then, and I'm guessing the second week, 9 to 3. And then the judge says, swear them in. So everybody who's a potential juror is going to get sworn in. The clerk says, does anyone not swear an oath? Okay. Clerk says, do you affirm under the penalty of perjury? And I guess everybody says, we do. It says, thank you. You may be seated. The judge says, everyone has a list of questions. There are 14 sequestered questions. You'll be escorted to 26B, which is a room. Circle the sequestered questions you have an answer. You have a answer yes to. These include, since you filled out a questionnaire, have you read about the case? Do you have training in addiction, sexual abuse? Have you worked for law enforcement? Have you ever been in a lawsuit? Have you ever been accused or been a victim of a crime? Are you impacted by allegations of rape, guns, intimate partner violence, etc.? Views of artists in the hip-hop community, cooperators with immunity, pseudonyms. 14 is anything else? I guess 14 might be a juror. When you're called back, you'll be shown a list of persons and places. The judge then says, escort them to 26B, which is room, all rise. Prosecutors and jurors leave, then one female returns and starts to read from a binder of people and places. The AUSA then says, let the juror keep the copy of the binder in order to say only numbers, not the true name of victims. So I guess these possible jurors are now being introduced to victims, okay? Whoa. Okay. It says, cool. It said, please bring in juror number 2. I know you have a change to review the list. Any you knew of? And the juror says, number 88, Michael B. Jordan. So it looks like they're saying they might have known this person. Actually, let me just continue. Also, Michael Myers, the actor. Also 190, place 13, Essex House Hotel. I used to work there. So I guess like they've seen a bunch of facts and evidences that's going to be presented, or like places and people, and they're showing their relation to it. Juror number 2 says, well, I know Michael B. Jordan, or I've met him. I don't know why they said Michael Myers, but they're talking about the actor. Who's the actor Michael Myers? What the fuck? And they said the Essex House Hotel, where some of the abuse allegedly happened, or the sex trafficking happened. They said they used to work there. So that's a conflict of interest, right? The judge says, well, could you be fair? The juror says, well, I could be. The judge says, and any answers to the 14 questions? The juror says, I'm a massage therapist and I had training. The judge says, in your questionnaire, question 10, can you explain your yes? Can we discuss in open court? He said, yeah, my sister was beaten by her ex-husband years ago. A black eye resulted in termination of their marriage. The judge says, can you be fair? The juror says yes. The judge then goes on by saying, yo, in your questionnaire, you've heard about the case in WNYC, NPR. The juror says, I haven't made any decision. The judge says, could you return back to that room? The juror then leaves, and then the judge says to the parties remaining, which I would believe is some faction of the AUSAs and also the defense. It says, any challenges for cause? AUSA says no. Agnifilio says, yes, we are going to challenge. Agnifilio says, so now we know it's a guy. In his questionnaire, the defendant probably was engaged in this, but I don't know what's mentioned after. The judge then says, then he said he could still be fair. I will overrule you. So it appears that Diddy's lawyer, Mark Agnifilio, he's being the lead, right? We know Brian Steele is on this, but Brian Steele is in the back cooling, right? For now, as this trial starts and as opening statements, it's going to be really important who gives opening statements, because we're looking at Brian Steele. Right now, Brian Steele is a young Kobe. He's young LeBron on the Heat. He's Michael Jordan when he starts going on that three-peat. However, he's had limited time to prepare for this case. So bet. What we've seen is that they're going with Agnifilio, who knows the case the best. So he's the one who's raising, hey, judge, we object. We think this person should be dismissed. They shouldn't even be whatever. And I think how it goes, let's watch a video to figure it out. Jury selection, federal cases. We just want to understand how it's going to go, right? I'm going to find a generic video because here we go. We just want to see how it works. We want to hear how it works for federal cases. Breaking down federal cases. Oh my God, yo, this is such a big thing. So usually, from what I've heard, and y'all have so many chat niggas that are lawyers, I hear that usually the prosecutors and the defense usually have a certain amount, like sometimes maybe 3. Like no matter what, you can say this person, we're using this, that it's like a no reason clause. It's like they're not going to be on it, right? And this is for like objectionable shit that you know the prosecutor might want to have because it's going to be biased for them. You're like, they can't be on it. And that person will get dismissed. Other than the few chances you have to just use that like you're out of here card, you have to basically kind of provide some cause or some proof. And the judge, who's there to be the neutral arbiter, is supposed to agree with you in principle. And if there's a problem or a disagreement, and if the judge says, okay, then I think this might be an issue, basically that juror will be less likely to be used. Okay? So let me see if I can get a video that kind of explains what I'm saying.
On a jury is no easy task, especially in a big, high-profile trial like Cosby's.
Jury consultants say the right picks can make the difference between guilt or innocence. Our David Spunt talked with one man here in Philadelphia who's made a career out of picking juries.
Yeah, he really has. The old days of picking a jury, crossing your fingers and hoping for the best, that doesn't work anymore. There is some high-tech stuff going on here. Tonight, I spoke to a man who's usually behind the scenes, but he agreed to step into the spotlight for us to tell us a little bit about what he does. He's what many call a jury whisperer. He's handled multi-million-dollar high-profile cases.
We're going to ask you a few questions, and then we'll explain to you why you're here.
Inside this Center City office, a focus group is underway. Members of the group are pretending to be potential jurors in a high-profile case. At the front of the room, the jury whisperer, Mark Calzaretta.
I don't mind the term, I think it's a complimentary term.
Calzaretta runs Magna Legal Services, and he has offices across the country. His goal, to see how jurors would react, is a science.
It's an advantage. It's a tactical and strategic advantage.
Okay, so they're not telling you how this is. Oh, man, I wanted that explanation. Anyway, hopefully you accept my explanation. I'm not the biggest legal expert, but I think I know a little bit. Anyway, all right, cool. So just to give an overview of the process, because this is kind of boring. This really is a boring part that nobody really cares about, but it does matter. Like, for example, in the YNW Melly trial, allegedly one of the jurors was a Melly fan that somehow snuck their way on the jury, and they're the reason why it became a hung trial. So essentially, from what I've heard, it was a YNW Melly fan who made their way on the jury, and they would never vote guilty for him. And I hear that supposedly there was a majority guilty on Melly's trial. Again, I've heard this informally, so I don't want to act like this is actual fact, but that matters because what happens? YNW Melly had a mistrial, and he's still awaiting trial for a retrial, right? And at some point, they're going to have to give him a retrial, or they're going to have to drop these charges or give him bail. Cool. So let's try to figure this out. So jurors matter a lot. So it looks like Mark Agnafilio wanted juror number 2 out of there. The judge said, they could still be impartial. We're still going to consider them. Now, the judge doesn't necessarily pick the jurors. It's almost like this like negotiated, agreed upon jury pool by the prosecutors and the defense, with the judge kind of like, giving and taking, right? So Mark Agnafilio says in his questionnaire, he says the defendant probably was engaged in this, basically saying that this guy is already kind of biased, thinking Diddy was doing some of this shit. Judge says, have you reviewed the list? Do any of you recognize? So this is another juror. Says the juror says 133. The judge says, a celebrity. Could you be fair? So it looks like they showed a bunch of people who might be witnesses or people involved in stories in some of these freak-offs, and they're saying, do you know any of these people? And the person says, I do know someone, which is 133 or item 133. So the judge says, well, yeah, that's a celebrity, but could you be fair even though you know that person? The juror says, yes. I know there's a lot of celebrities on the list. The judge says, okay, put them to the side. And the places, the juror says, I don't know them. So the places are going to be these really high-end hotels, some of these addresses that might be like big mansions and shit like that, where maybe Diddy stayed or did freak offs at, and looked like this woman saying, "I never been to these places," right? Why does it matter if these people have been to these places? Because you never know, right? These people might have a certain type of predisposition about what these places mean, or bringing somebody to these places mean, or they might have a working relationship with the place, or have met subsidiaries or people of Diddy by being there, because sometimes, these celebrities go to the same hotels consistently, right? The juror says, I have a family member who went through something like this. Ooh. So it would be difficult to sit through. It would make me uncomfortable. Okay? So it looks like the jury basically says, hey, listen, I'm not really comfortable with all of this stuff. This is triggering. And the judge excuses his juror. Now, here's the thing. Maybe the juror is being honest. They could also be just kind of like, this is going to be, I don't think it's going to be YSL trial long, but this could be a thing that drags on. Some people also don't want to be on this jury. They don't want to be in this infamous case where, like, who knows, maybe Diddy has some goons or whatever. They don't want this type of level of notoriety or having this amount of pressure on their particular shoulders. So this person sounds like they got a job, and they probably have this excuse already, saying, hey, this makes me uncomfortable. They said the key words. The judge says your excuse. Bring in 5. So what about the list? 5 says, I knew none of them, but 4A and 4C, yes. The judge says you had training, so clearly it was about questions about maybe their training or expertise when it comes to dealing with either alcohol addiction and other things, maybe even massages, or maybe even sexual addiction. And it says, yeah, training. The juror says, yes, I had some learning on sexual harassment, and I've seen psychiatrists. The judge says, have you had their services? The judge says, yes. And the juror says, yes, and I could be fair. The judge then says on question 7 on the questionnaire, the juror says, I am against capital punishment. So I guess they ask on question 7, are you against the death penalty? And that might be a question that's irrelevant to this case, because it's not a death penalty case, but it's relevant to the point of, well, are you against punishment for people's crimes, right? Because sometimes empathy might creep in, like, yeah, he did it, but like he shouldn't go to jail for 20 years. The jurors are not here to debate with themselves if the time the law mandates for those crimes being committed and the sentencing, this ain't civil. In some civil cases, jurors do actually determine the punitive damages or the amount or the time. You know what I mean? If obviously not jail time because it's civil, but they determine the sentence. When it comes to federal, unlike any state, they're held, and they're actually, the judges' hands are tied behind their backs to what's called mandatory minimums, okay? So essentially, they ask about certain things, and they're trying to see if, maybe a juror is going to be like, yeah, even if I found a guy guilty, I don't know if I'll be cool with him going to jail for life. And that matters, because you might vote a different way, because now you're thinking about a life sentence for someone who did some shit that, according to law, you would get a life sentence for. The judge then says, well, what have you heard about a case? Look, can you see? What have you heard about a case? Let me make this a little bit smaller. Chat, I can see most of it. So what have you heard about the case, right? The juror says, well, last week I saw a video of the defendant allegedly assaulting another person in a hotel, presuming innocence. The judge then says, I see no grounds to excuse for cause. You? AUSA says no. Agnifila says no. So they were cool with the person still being there. Judge says, bring in juror 6. Juror 6 says, I had HR training, and my son is a law clerk in Connecticut. Judge says, well, you have great handwriting. You wrote, you say, an image 6, hotel hall. Let me see. What is this? So it was a photo. It didn't seem like something wanted. Huh? You said the image could be damning. Why did you say that? It was a photo. It didn't seem to be something wanted. The judge says, I don't see ground to exclude this juror either. The AUSA, which, by the way, this is James Comey, the FBI lead person at a point, their daughter. So if you don't know who the AUSA, who's the lead AUSA is, look up James Comey, right? James Comey is a former director of the FBI. His daughter is a assistant U.S. attorney. Okay? So her whole family has a deep background in law enforcement. Now, not only is she the lead AUSA on this case, as well she has other assistant U.S. attorneys that are all going to be white women. Okay? Here we go. So it says, any more questions? Ms. Comey. Comey says no. Judge says, whatever. All right, cool. Comey says, I agree. Don't have to exclude her. Agnophilia says she used strong language. And by the way, here's the thing when it comes to jury selection. The prosecutor is building a case that they think most reasonable people will be able to convict this person. Not only that, the prosecutors usually play a game where they have already poisoned the media. So they're like, any reasonable person that heard about this in the media is going to vote the way we want to have them vote if we present a good enough case. So you're not going to see most objections from the prosecutor. You're going to see from the defense, because the defense got to be like, yo, who knows? Maybe this person hates Diddy because he broke up with J-Lo back in the day. They hate Diddy because they think Diddy's responsible for Biggie's death, or they hate Diddy because they're a Young Miami fan and they feel like he fucked her up, whatever it is. So it's the defense job to kind of like raise a lot of these issues. So it says she used strong language, damning evidence, blah, blah, blah. The judge says, I'll excuse them for cause. So Agnophilia gets an excusal, which is juror six, I mean. It says, and we're the ones who decided to not use a CNN video. There's not been no ruling by Your Honor. Ooh. Wow. Now, I didn't hear this in preliminary hearing. I never heard this. But it appears that maybe the AUSA, while talking about jurors and talking to the judge about the juror that was sitting in front of them, they said, we're the one who decided not to use the CNN video. Now, because they're not using CNN video, or they're using 2016 footage of Diddy, they could still be. Because the CNN video is a video that CNN put out. However, there's supposedly this unedited video or a longer video that doesn't show jump cuts that has the beatdown. But the AUSA is saying, yo, we're not using CNN's video. They're not saying we're not using the video of that alleged assault. Judge said, based on the questionnaire, I'm excluding her. Let's move on to juror 15. The juror 15 is a male. He said, I just started a new job in a hotel. You could tell he wanted to not be there. The judge says, excuse. Okay, got him out of there. Next juror is number 20. It says number 88 and 116. The judge says, musicians. 20 says, I have training May 12th to May 15th. The judge says, well, so basically they're saying, well, I can't be here May 12th to May 15th because I'm a musician. I got training. The judge says, well, if you're selected, you ain't going to that fucking. That's not a, jury duty actually trumps your job. Like, no matter what job, it trumps your job, okay? So if you be like, oh, we got this important meeting, they're going to not say, oh, go to your job. Because if they did, everybody would say, oh, I got an important thing for my job. So the judge said, if you're selected, you're not going. The juror then says, I was a mandatory reporter as a teacher at a parochial school in the Bronx. I have a friend on Yonkers PD. The juror then says, when I was 16, I was caught shoplifting at Universal Studios at Harry Potter World. I had to be a lawyer. The judge says, what did you take? The juror says, a wand. The judge says, you wrote that you like to post on Instagram. The juror says it was a comedian. It was about the baby oil. The juror says, well, it was just a comedy seller comedian, no one I follow. The judge says, I don't see no grounds to excuse. Both sides agree. So even Mark Agnophilia, which is Diddy's lawyer. Next is a female. The judge says, you have ocular migraines, huh? The juror says, well, it hasn't happened in months, but when it does, I kind of cover my eyes for 20 to 40 minutes. So she's saying she got headaches. Here we go. We got to keep going, Chad. The judge said, what's your employment? They says web maintenance, secretarial. I took trailient training. The juror says, this is real life. Whatever's going to occur in your courtroom, the judge said, what's bothering you? It's unfamiliar for me. So for my answers, to have my answers very much matter. Judge says, so kidnapping, arson, can you be fair? The juror says, it's kind of foreign to me, like a problem. This juror is trying to clearly get out. The juror says, why is it USA versus Sean Combs instead of a person versus Sean Combs? I was curious. Clearly, this person's playing dumb. They want to get out of this thing. So I was curious. I saw someone get run over by a train. I was okay with it. I mean, not okay with it, but I did not become a second problem. I tend to shut it down and call 911. So this person's saying, I don't give a fuck about crime being committed. That's what they're saying. And, you know, the judge usually is smart at this point. Like, you're not going to say some wild, dumb shit and be like, oh, you're excused, because everybody's going to use that play. The juror says, I was once drunk and disorderly in Massachusetts. The judge says, well, fuck all that. Could you be fair? The juror says, yes, right? The judge says, could you take off 8 weeks from your job? The juror says, I will ask him. Comey says, she said, so question 10, she said, prefer answer in person. Juror 2 said, I'm fine. We don't know what that question is. The juror says, a dentist, my parents didn't pay him. They sent him to work for him, blah, blah, blah. The judge says, a dentist? What do you do? Kissing and fondling. So they're asking if they ever been around any creep behavior. And the judge says, how long did it last? Says 2 years. The juror says, I think there's abuse every day. I think it made me a better person. Oh, my God. This person got to get dismissed. This person's saying the worst things in the world. Oh, I think abuse is just kind of part of it. What the hell? Okay. All right. And it says, I think there's abuse every day. I think it made me a better person ultimately. Perpetrators are often unaware. Ooh, so basically they're saying the criminals sometimes don't even know they're doing crime. Some fulfill a victim role, basically saying some of the criminals could be victims. The judge says, don't go look up with RICO, what a RICO is. And then Agnifilio says, can we approach? They whisper. The judge says, is there anything from the dentist's office? Can you be fair? The juror says, yes. They said back to courtroom. So it looks like the judge did not buy the bullshit they were selling and didn't dismiss them, even though they were saying wild shit. The judge says, I don't see no reason to be excused. Agnifilio says, she shut down and misdirected or redirected. I sense a struggle within her. The judge says, nah, we're not going for it. So this judge is not trying to dismiss people. And you got to imagine, like, this judge has sat through many trials. They've seen people come to court who probably are thinking, damn, if I take off all this time from work, if you don't know how jury duty works, like, they'll pay you, like, you get paid from courts, but it'll be like $50 a day. If you make like $300-400 at your job ain't gonna pay you $300-400 because you're on jury duty. They're gonna be like, all right, bet, yeah, you can take the time off. We're not gonna fire you, but shit, you're gonna get paid by the courts, $50 a day. Some people don't want to do that. They're like, fuck, I'd rather go to work than go to this, right? So the judge sees through a lot of that bullshit, and they usually be like, no, we're not gonna dismiss you, so you're gonna move on to the next round. Okay, cool. Says overruled, bathroom break, so let's try to get through the next 10 jurors. Oh my God, the judge is about business. Agnifilio asked for a bathroom break. He said, nah, let's do 10 more. Voice, what is this? I'm a little nervous today. The judge says, okay, we'll break. I don't know who voice is. Now, let me give a little bit of details here. So I know we've been reading for a long time. This was the initial, and by the way, shout out to Inner City Press, man. Really good guy. I really enjoy all the things he does. This was him this morning talking about the trial, right?
Okay, here we are, Matthew Russell Lee, Inner City Press, here at the Southern District of New York Courthouse. Today, Monday, May 5th, 2025. Well, it's been a long time coming, but today it begins jury selection in U.S. versus Sean Diddy Combs. We've covered it since the day of the indictment. We've covered the many civil cases. We've covered Busby coming in and going out. And now, jury selection. It's finally arrived. Now, there have been various reports. In fact, in the penultimate pretrial conference, we reported that the judge asked, has a plea offer, was it made? And they said yes, and you can allocate them about it next week, which was Thursday. And then it happened, and he confirmed that an offer was made, and he rejected it. People have said that means that he rejected the offer last week. No, that's not what it means. In fact, the week before, they'd already said it had been already offered and rejected. At some undisclosed period during the pretrial proceedings, an offer of undisclosed substance and prison guidelines was made and rejected. But so there's that. It wasn't rejected on the eve of trial. And whether it was still open.
So, yeah, so we keep hearing this conversation about there was a plea deal offered. So Diddy was offered a plea deal. I would imagine probably early on, before pretrial hearings, which started about generally about a few weeks ago. I think he was probably offered a plea deal maybe in December or January. And we've heard these rumors like, oh, 5 years. I don't believe that for a second. I don't believe Diddy was offered 5 years, 7 years. I don't think he was offered anything under 10. I just do not see that at all. Because if it was offered anything below 10, I think they would have negotiated that he could have pled guilty to, because here's the thing. He pleads guilty to some prostitution shit. Nobody looks at him like some weird creep. They just kind of look at him like there's mad prostitutes out here. Like half of the chicks on OnlyFans are damn near prostitutes, right? So it's like people will kind of get over that. Now, sex trafficking, rape, like maybe even DV, even though I think DV people wouldn't care, like maybe like physical abuse, like people might not care that much. But like some of the hard charges, if he was offered less than 10 years, I could see him saying no to, because those are like, it's going to fuck you up anyway. But here's the thing. If he was offered like, let's say 10 or, say 10. If you're offered 10, you could probably get 7. You're already pretty much locked up for 1. If you get 7, all you got to do is 5.5. You're locked up for 1. You would do 4 years, and this is all behind you. You know what I mean? Like, again, I'm not saying that Diddy would willingly sign up for jail, but like, rather than risk it and go to jail for life, like, who the hell would do that, right? So I don't believe that whole thing that Diddy was offered anything below 10. I don't believe it one bit.
Is not known either. Often these.
Also, let me talk to you about the statutes and what the penalties are for some of the things he's accused of. The RICO carries 20 years, okay? The RICO is 20 years. And even some of the bigger predicate acts is 20 to life. But let's just say 20 because Diddy doesn't have a substantial criminal history. So let's say 20. So he's facing really like 20 years, right? If the prosecutors came down to offer him 5, because that was supposed to be a rumor, 5. The only thing that's there for 5 is prostitution, which means that's the prosecution telling you they have nothing on the major charges, RICO, sex trafficking. They're just trying to get you for paying for pussy shit, which is like, okay, if you're down to give a deal for just paying for pussy, that's because you know you can't prove the bigger charges, which is RICO and rape, right? And RICO, rape, and sex trafficking. So I can see why he would take it to trial, but I really don't think he was offered anything below 10. No way. I think he was offered 15 to 20.
Such offers
15 probably.
Have expiration dates. In any event, so there's that, and we're going to begin. Now, there's going to be some issues around how much of the jury selection the press and public will be able to report on. And we stand ready to, if necessary, file to unsequester, because it's a public trial. Same thing later down the road as to the evidence itself, including the freak-off videos. But I digress. Now, we're also, of course, covering the exploding Trump docket, on which I have to say, in this case, a judge in New Jersey, Mr. Michael E.
All right, so he kind of moves on to a different topic, right? Now, there's another update which came through here.
Okay, here we are, Matthew Russell Lee, Inner City Press, here at the Southern District of New York Courthouse.
This was around lunchtime he did this, and this was after, like, all the stuff we read. This was, like, pretty much the next thing.
Amid Sean Diddy Combs' jury selection. Now, the first morning was really quite exemplative of what New York City is. They had among the prospective jurors interviewed this morning was a woman who works at HBO, which, of course, as pointed out by Tenny Garagos, one of Sean Combs' 8 lawyers here today, has just recently produced The Fall of Diddy. She remains in the pool. She was not excluded for cause, but Judge Subramanian said she can be questioned in a second round about whether her job in HBO is close enough to the documentary. On the other hand, there was a woman from Simon & Schuster, a head of marketing. She says she's reviewed a press release for a book by Al B. Shore that's all about Diddy. So she was excluded for cause. There was also a woman who designs fonts. There was a guy who works for the Department of Corrections. There was a whole slew of people. We live tweeted all of it. You can find it on Inner City Press. And we'll continue in the afternoon. And we'll continue. Apparently it's going to take 3 days. Some say more. And then they'll end up having a jury. And on May 12th, opening statements and going forward. But the circus has arrived, and it's quite something. Inner City Press, to be continued.
Okay. All right, so now we're after lunch. We're after lunch at this point. And just please take a seat. Look at this. So a juror mentions that Kanye West and their view of him makes them think they'll be unfair. It says, anything about your views on Ye that makes you unfair? The juror says, nah. The judge says, well, what do you know about his case? The juror says accusation of violent behavior. I saw the hallway video while at the gym. I get dragging. I saw some of that shit. The Agnew says, sidebar. Judge said very briefly, they talked for a little bit. The judge says, last question. Did you ever talk to people about this case? The juror says, nah, I never talked to nobody about this case. Do you believe that, chat? Well, whatever. The judge says, have you expressed an opinion? The juror says, no. I don't even got social media. The judge actually does not rule this person out. They say go back to 26B. The judge says no objections. Both sides say no. The judge says, well, you could pass up questions to me. The AUSA says, I'd like to see them first. The judge says, of course. Next juror is 28. And on question 13, you said yes on the accusation of crime. On 28, they said, what? My mom worked for a bank and stole money. What? Okay, so they're admitting about some of these jurors to try to, be open and honest. They're talking about their own crimes. Judge says, you wrote unsure. The juror says, all I know, he was arrested. Juror says, no ground to exclude her. Both sides agree. Juror 29, he says, you traveled for work. Could you stop? Juror 29 says, it would be an inconvenience, but I could do it. The judge says, where do you work? He says, HBO. The judge says, any people on the list you recognize? The juror says, well, I recognize Michael B. Jordan. Whoa. Why is Michael B. Jordan in the Diddy case? Now, granted, this is not no civil case no more, chap. This is not a civil case anymore, okay? This is not a civil case. This is a criminal case, which means the evidence that will be presented or will be given to the defense as part of discovery is going to be relevant evidence that the government believes is going to be part of their case. Why would Michael B. Jordan be part of that? Now, we know Kid Cudi because of the arson and supposedly the car getting blown up. It says Michael B. Jordan and Kid Cudi. And he said, but I don't know his music. That's what the juror said. Also, my sister and I was molested by a family member. The judge says, who? Oh, my God. The juror says, a cousin. I think I would feel empathy for victims, but I am logical. The juror says, I seen the video is disturbing, but I don't know the full story. Agnew says, we have proposed a question. Gave it to Comey. The judge says, has the case been discussed at HBO? The juror says, in the hall, that he was arrested. The judge says, I don't see no reason to exclude. Agnew says, yo, listen, come on, judge. HBO put out a negative documentary called The Fall of Diddy. Like, it was the past 6 weeks. The judge says, really? Miss Comey, which is the prosecutor, is there any appearance of impropriety? AUSA says, no, we don't think there's a problem here because HBO just makes a lot of documentary. The judge actually says, I overrule for now. So the judge is kind of not, judge is not trying to, and by the way, you got to imagine the judge's mentality going into this. They're like, yo, listen, if I got to overrule or I got to oust everybody who has any knowledge of this case, we're not going to find a jury. This guy is wildly popular. He is really influential. He's one of the biggest, celebrities on this planet. We have to go off, are they innately biased rather than did they know anything about the case, okay? The judge says, could you close off anything about the book, right? And I guess this is the book. The juror says, I have to tell my colleague, don't send me any more press releases about the book. Agnew says, I have a question. Hands up. Judge says, is it a salary position? The juror says, my bonus is tied to the books. Oh, they got to be out of here. What? The juror leaves. Then Combs' defense attorney, second in command, we would imagine, to Brian Steele, says, please release. Press release refers to the mysterious 2018 death. I would imagine that of Kim Porter. The trial will include a discussion of Kim Porter, and I'll be sure. The judge says, isn't this too close to home? Comey says, we won't hear too much about Mr. Brown, which is, I'll be sure, I believe, and Mrs. Porter, but sure, excluded, okay? The next juror, okay? So I think they exclude the juror. Next juror is like, I have a class of CUNY. I have to log in at 4:50. The judge says, could it work if you left here at 4? How do you view the class? The juror says, on my phone. I know of Dallas Austin, which is a producer. I know from news about Sean Combs' children, the choreographer Lauren Gibson. By the way, she's been on multiple reality shows as a dancing coach. So the juror says, I used to watch Making a Band. I saw Dawn Richards, Harv Peer. Michelle Williams, I know of Cassie Ventura. I've seen things in the news. The judge says, what did you say? The juror says, well, video mistreatment. But I can listen objectively. My fiance had a felony case. Drugs. Juror says he pled guilty, got 4 years, came home and won. I am aware of music dating back to 1990s from the radio. The judge says, we don't got to exclude. Judge says, next is juror 52. So what is that? The juror says, a woman's event. Because supposedly they said they have to travel to a Spirit Weavers gathering. The judge says, well, you're going to have to miss this. The juror says, I believe it would be available in future years. I had experience with sexual assault in college. A neighbor, we were flirting. He took it too far. The juror says, I think a lot of women have been sexually harassed or assaulted. I don't think it makes the person you did it a horrible person in all respects. I have a psychology degree in sexuality and women's self-esteem. The judge says a master's. The juror says a bachelor. They then say, I worked at a bougie design firm, Pentagram. The judge says, what do they design? It says fonts. The judge says, like Courier. The judge says, never. By the way, this is Pentagram. Let's see what this is. Okay. All right. Judge says, I see no grounds to exclude. Next is 55. He says, you got an open bottle ticket? The juror says, yes. He says, shame on you. That's what the judge says and laughs. He says, I'm in the Department of Corrections in charge of incarcerated accounts. The juror says, I sued the Port Authority. I hurt my back on an escalator. They settled. He says, weren't you arrested for fraud? The juror says, yeah, I was in a car accident. I went to physical therapy, but it got raided. I was accused of insurance fraud. I did plead guilty. Judge says, I see no grounds to excuse, and they go on lunch break. Wow. Wow. All right, Chad. Let me see. Did Mo Gagnick go here? Lawyer for workers. Is it this? Nope. Okay. No, that's not it. All right, bet. Let's see.
Day one of
know the full extent.
Now, Shorty's outside the courtroom, and if I ever went, I'd be seeing her. They got tents and all type of shit. Here she goes. I think this is at lunchtime.
We're able to answer yes or no to, but I was kind of surprised at how many people didn't know of these like laundry lists of popular celebrities, especially when you have names like Kanye West on there, especially when you have names like, you know, Michael B. Jordan, that type of sort. But there were some prospective jurors who did not, or who were not familiar with these certain people. Now, as far as places goes, I don't know the full extent of what was asked as far as places goes, but there was this one juror who did kind of talk about a hotel, the Essex House Hotel, that was on the list of places.
Right, we did see that. Let's kind of go further into it. Let's get a better update.
People in Diddy's lives who have appeared on these documentaries will appear inside that courtroom as well, too.
So let's go back to the idea of the jurors having a legal history, whether it's criminal history, whether it's filing lawsuits. You got to tell me what you learned. And please, just to reiterate one more time for our audience, because it struck me, you had a potential juror who stole a wand?
She was probably one of my favorite prospective jurors, I'm not going to lie.
All right, we're gonna skip it.
So it's interesting to hear about their past legal connections.
Yeah, so they're asking these jurors if they've sued people, if basically almost asking, and I would imagine like the defense attorney and prosecutor probably agreed to this to be like, are they the type of person that if they feel salty or if they're broke, they would just file a frivolous lawsuit, or they would be trying to get like, compensation for just random shit that maybe they didn't have a point for, or maybe they have a criminal history and they're just kind of known as a finesser.
But talk to me now about what did the jurors say about their exposure to the case? So other than the fact they might know celebrities or places, talk to me about what they've seen about the case, whether that was documentaries, whether or not that was evidence that has been released so far in this case. What did we learn about what the jurors' exposure to the Sean Diddy Combs criminal case has been so far?
Yeah, it seemed like it really kind of varied. Some people have seen the documentary, that either being on HBO, The Fall of Diddy, or if they've seen the one on Peacock as well, too. Not very much mentioned about BBC or anything like that. But as far as just other mentions of what they have learned about the case probably beforehand was just water cooler talk, at the office. One woman said she actually works at HBO, and she was saying that, people have chatted about the case. Now, she says her job in particular.
We read that.
the live transcriptions kind of going through that so he can see the answers. So that kind of took care of the logistical issue, because at first they were talking about kind of sealing the answers, then kind of having it separate, and it would be too much, that it would take up too much time. But it seems like the method at which they're going is working out for both sides. You know, they go up, it doesn't take maybe more than about 2 minutes or so. They come back down. The judge will either keep the juror or dismiss the juror. And in this particular case, this juror who went over to the sidebar, she was dismissed for cause. And so that's kind of how they were able to kind of work around this entire situation. And it seems to be going pretty smoothly from both ends. I don't see too many complaints from either side on how this process is really going.
Let me add a little bit of legal context to that. So first of all, I would imagine that Combs has a right to see the transcript, right? Sixth Amendment right, public trial, due process right. So he has an ability to be there during the jury selection process in his own criminal case. It is interesting when we talk about this jury selection process, because we're not saying jurors were selected today to officially be on the trial. They've moved, or certain jurors have moved through the first stage of the process. Now, they can be stricken for cause. So a specific reason why they cannot serve.
So it's basically like an elimination process, if you guys are getting the drift, right? Like you get eliminated from round one, you make it to round two, and you see
on this jury, a legitimate reason. Now, that's different from later on when both sides, generally speaking, the prosecution and the defense, will have the option to put forward preemptory challenges. So both sides are typically granted a certain number of preemptory challenges where they can strike a potential juror without even providing a reason. And that's very advantageous for both the prosecution and the defense. But Elizabeth, moving on from today so far,
By the way, real quick, I hate to do shameless plugs, but kick.com/academics, we are 4 followers away from 1,000. Chat, what are we doing? Come on, I thought it was nothing bigger. Come on, you can't have us looking like peons out here in the streets. We need 1,000 followers instantly. I know we didn't go live today, but we will be live maybe tomorrow. And when we do get live over there, there's no ads. And we got some special things in store for you guys over there. By the way, also, I feel like I am cutting a promo at this point. Yo, I need everybody who's watching. We still have DJ Akademiks' birthday party I keep calling it birthday party. It's a birthday live podcast. Chat, I've been like wrestling with this. I'm like, I know it's my birthday joint, but like I can't be too drunk. So like, cause I want to give a performance too. You know what I mean? Like some crazy shit. But y'all go. We still got 35 tickets left on the lower level. Please, we're I think 10 days away. Just make sure you go cop all the tickets you can, please. If you're not coming and you watch all the stream all the time, you're in the tri-state area, you fake as fuck. I ain't gonna hold you. Anyway, let's get back to this.
Based on Judge Subramanian, who's the first guard to determine whether or not a juror can be stricken for cause, generally speaking, what did you make of his decision-making today? I mean, did he excuse a lot of jurors? Did he excuse maybe more jurors that were favored by the defense over the prosecution? Because I'll tell you, I know there was one juror, for example, who had apparently been watching the HBO documentary on Diddy. The prosecution was concerned about this juror, and the defense wasn't concerned, but the judge ended up excluding that juror nonetheless. So from what you could see on day one, were there a lot of jurors excused? Did it seem that more of the defense's preferences for jurors were excused, maybe more of the prosecution's? And where are we right now? I mean, do you believe that we're actually going to get a jury seated in a week?
Yes.
I kind of hold my breath a little bit on whether.
All right, I'm gonna say yes. Just basically, I think this judge is a no-nonsense judge. And, obviously he knows it's really important, but he's not going to just sit here and be like, oh, okay, I'm going to just throw up my hands and give up hope because this guy's too known. So if they ask the question and whatever is in the questionnaire, do you know Sean Combs, that's not enough to disqualify somebody, right? Obviously, they have some more background questions. I can see if they have, maybe any predispositions towards him as a person or maybe the crime and, try to eliminate people that way. But, like, they're not going to be like, oh, Diddy and he's the most famous thing, so you're eliminated. So that's going to be a big thing, all right? All right, cool. Another juror says, deputy says, next juror, female, it says, I know 3 or 4 on the list, not personally. I know of them, Dallas Austin, Dawn Richards. Ooh. Is Dawn Richards one of the victims? Wow. I grew up watching MTV. Why is Dallas Austin on here? I was hit by a car, got foot surgery. My boyfriend at the time got a Titanic plate in the Bronx. My uncle was charged with R-worded his baby mama. Judge said, "Could you be fair?" Damn, even after that, I think they're saying that for the jury the judge to be like, "All right, you're dismissed." The judge is still asking questions. Yo, could you be fair? I might have. I don't think it'd be a problem. The details are vague, right? Like they're asking for the judge to say no. The juror says, "I did see a documentary on HBO." The judge says, "Any further questions?" Comey, the AUSA, says, "I have one." It shows agnophilia, so it looked like they got to confer before they ask the judge in front of the juror. And they says, if you've heard testimony, the judge now asks, so I guess the judge asking the questions. If you've heard testimony from people you saw on HBO documentary, would you believe them? The juror says, it would depend. I don't remember much. The juror leaves. Comey says the juror hesitated about the HBO documentary. We anticipate some of these in the documentary testify in a trial. Wow. We asked for exclusion. Agnophilia says she could be fair. We want to keep her. Wow. Ooh. That might have been a plant, chat. Did y'all peep that? Y'all peep that, chat? Did y'all peep that? So this person comes in and they're playing up to the prosecutor like, yeah, people in my family got raped. I don't like that type of shit. They're like, what about the documentary? Well, I kind of did see the documentary. So they asked, well, would you believe somebody in the documentary? Maybe, but I don't remember too much. Look like they're playing it up. Look like Agnophilia's team, Diddy's team, is saying, nah, this person, they're capping. They're on our side. They love Diddy, right? Comey, who's the prosecutor, says, they hesitated too much. Nah, get them out of here, all right? We don't fuck with them, right? And they also gave some details. We anticipate some of these in the documentary testifying at trial. Ooh, let's go see who's in the documentary. HBO documentary, Diddy. Okay, here we go. The fall of Diddy. We got to see who's in it. Let's look at guest. Who's in this? Fuck. Okay, these are cast. So these are, okay. All right, let's see. There's going to be a lot of journalists. Okay. D. Woods, Danny Kane. Okay. Torre. Dahlia Grace. Yeah, okay. There's so many people. We can't really pinpoint who this could be, right? This person works for Rolling Stone. All cast and crew. Oh, okay. Victims. Thalia Graves. Ooh, she says she's a victim of Sean Combs. Let's Google her. Here we go, chat. Thalia Graves speaks out. Ooh.
Depicted. It's a pain that reaches into your very core
That might be her that's going to be in the trial.
of who you are and leaving emotional scars that may never fully heal. Some of the hardest parts of this pain are the shame and the guilt I have experienced that plays a negative part in my day-to-day ability to function properly.
Okay, so she could be one of them. She's supposedly a victim. I don't expect any social media personalities to interview. Another victim, Kat Passion. Okay, let's see who that is. Let's see who this is. This could be one of the people.
What is up? Exactly. But dreamed when they were watching that I would have done everything changed. It sounds like he gets.
So that's Kat Passion.
Hairstyle.
Yeah, I never even heard of this chick.
We learned today in Diddy's trial that one of his victims might not be testifying against him anymore. Diddy has 5 different charges. He has the racketeering RICO charge, he has 2 trafficking charges, and then he has 2 charges to engage in prostitution. Diddy has 4 alleged victims who are supposed to be the center of all of these charges and who are supposed to testify against him in his trial, but now we have learned that victim number 3 might not even show up to testify. At the end of jury selection today, the judge asked, will victim 3 testify? And the government said, I don't know, she may not show. The judge said, will you mention her in the opening? And the government said, I don't expect so. If she were here to testify, it would be around the second half. What's really crazy about this, just last week, they said that victim number 3 wanted to testify against Diddy with her name being known to the public, because as of right now, the only person who was testifying with her name being known to the public is Cassie Ventura. This video is so much more. This meant long. Diddy.
Okay, so maybe that's her. Who else is seen as a victim in here? No, okay, so that's it. Okay, so if you ask me, whoever this person is, that's definitely going to testify is Kat Passon, or who else? I'm going to just go with Thalia Graves. Wow. Okay. All right. So they mentioned this HBO documentary. All right. Cool. So looked like the prosecutor or Diddy's defense lawyer wanted to keep this person, but the prosecutor was like, nah. Right. So he's excluded. Juror 65 male says, I got to take care of my child. I could try. He says, about guilt or innocence, I don't know. He says, you have to see it, though, first, right? 65 says, I got trouble understanding this questions. The judge is ruling because this guy is, maybe somehow impaired or whatever and just out of it. Just said, whatever. Juror 70. So I work in a lab in a hospital. I got training, but I got a problem with the legal words. Also, man push woman. He doesn't mean it. The judge says, who? The juror says, my husband. The judge says, what happened? He says, he pled guilty. They took him in jail. So this bitch come over here and start explaining that her husband beating her ass. Like she think that she had a police precinct. They're like, all right, you go home, bro. Just go home. You don't even know what's going on. 381. And so I'm a behavioral health associate at Elmhurst Hospital. I deal with psychiatrists daily. Says any patients with trauma? Like, they all got trauma. I was with the Department of Homelessness Services Police. He says, you meant son's prom? The person says 5 p.m. So I guess his son had a prom 5 p.m. So my husband was convicted of an attempted murder in Brooklyn, served 21 years. Said, what's the victim's name? He said, I don't remember the victim's name. My stepson was getting bullied back on the block. He came to the block with some friends, and there was gunfire. The judge says, any application? I guess maybe any questions they were asking for the two parties. He said none. So that person was not excluded. By the way, it doesn't mean these people are going to be jurors. They just move on to the next process, right? Next juror says, when it was break-in, they heard about the situation, house raised Cassie the artist. He said, could you be fair? Yes. He says, all right, we're not going to exclude you. 89, he says, I know Diageo. I was a sales manager with the airline. My sister is a federal prosecutor in San Antonio. She works mostly on immigration. I said, could you be fair? Yeah, I could be fair. I grew up in a neighborhood with a high-profile couple. I was closer in age with the girlfriend. My parents asked me to be a peacemaker. And they actually excused this juror, right? I guess, just too close to situations that might be similar. Juror 92 would be like, I'd like to serve, but my child is in the hospital. The judge says excused. Juror 106, I'm with Engender Health. I'm on the board of St. John's Hospital, Yonkers. I have a friend in the Manhattan DA. I'm repping the LGBT community there. Or I guess they said their friend is. Judge says, all right, we don't give a fuck about that. Can you be fair? And say, yeah. So, all right, cool. You can go back. 110 say, I got job interviews planned. The judge says, I'm going to excuse you for cause. I'm wondering why. Because before he's told everybody, like, we don't give a fuck about your job. You know what I mean? Okay. Juror 116 says, I can't stand videos of skateboarders going down to the ground. Just can't. He said, but could you be fair? The person says, yes. He said, you wrote that you saw the hallway video. So I don't see much of it. Agnophilia says, I have written questions. And he passes up. The juror says, how could you watch violence in court but not on TV? The juror says, the latter is staged. And didn't get excluded. Agnophilia says, I'm going to want to question the juror from the HBO, but not in front of the others. The judge said, we'll get to that. Bring in juror 117. It says, my wife deposed Sean Combs in a case about a stampede. The judge says, has she expressed negative views about him? He says, yes. I'm guessing this person's going to be excused. Did you tell your wife you're on the case? He says, no, but another prospective juror who knows my wife saw me and told her. And said, write that juror's name on the Post-it note. My adopted adult daughter has been sexually abused. It's no, they got to get this person off. So I have a question. Comey passes up. Said, can you not talk about the case with your wife? What? Come on, stop it, Judge. You know this thing gonna be pillow talking. The person said yes. The judge says, if you're chosen, I will order you not to speak with her about this case. Excuse. And Comey says, what's the name of the other juror? The judge says, I'll tell you later. I know Mr. Combs has parties with drugs, says another juror. Drugs and sex. I learned it from podcasts. I listen to Joe Rogan. He says, can you be fair? Yes. Not excused. Nor is 127. They're moving fast through these people. So this is like the first round of dismissing people. Agnifilio says, I want to question that HBO witness. The judge says, could you make an application? Now the group question. Not excused jurors come back in. Juror 5 said, I live in Manhattan, work in finance. I'm a churchgoer, member in Connecticut, but I attend the St. John Baptiste on Upper East Side. Juror says, I work in web maintenance. I got a newsletter from our local politicians like Harvey Weinstein. I don't have a TV. I took toots and, okay, all right, damn, this is just a whole bunch of stuff. Massage therapist, I'm single. I am a BFA in acting from NYU. I listen to NPR, like jazz or whatever. Okay, so this is a bunch of people who are kind of going through the process. I watched the NBA. Which team? Golden State Warriors. Holy shit. And it looks like they get to the end of the day at some point. Let me play the rest of this to kind of like end.
Now we'll actually see an entire jury this week, but we'll see. You never know what can happen. I'm still in shock that we're even about to go on trial next week. So, don't take my word for it necessarily. But as far as the judge kind of dismissing jurors or keeping jurors, I was surprised at the amount of jurors that he kind of held on to today. To your point, Jesse, just kind of about this one juror, who had seen the documentary, or even one juror I found interesting. She was the one with the ocular migraine. She says it happens only about a few times a year. She says she needs like about 20-30 minutes. And I was kind of surprised that the judge had kept her on because, she was also the one to kind of talk about how a dentist who she had worked under was previously inappropriate with her when she was a teenager and all of that sort, and yet the judge decided to keep her on. And there was one moment that Diddy, I could tell, wasn't too fond of this particular juror. I shouldn't say too fond, but you could tell that he didn't seem like he had necessarily wanted her as a part of the juror, and that was that HBO photo producer. And so she had talked about, she also kind of talked about, her previous history when it came to molestation in her family. It was by a cousin, and it was done to her and her sister. She says she can feel empathy but also be fair and impartial. But she did particularly point out that she called the CNN video disturbing and unsettling to watch. But she said that she could listen to all of the facts. And she was also the one who kind of had talked about, the water cooler talk at the office, mainly about Diddy and his case, that type of sort. But the defense did bring up that HBO documentary, but the government said that she shouldn't be excused. And so it seems like...
So you're going to ask more questions about HBO documentary. Remember, they got 4 more days, right? So they're going to keep going until Friday. And the judge expects to start next Monday, which is the 12th, right? So they got 4 more days to kind of figure it out. I expect this to be done in like 3 or 4 days, or that's what I believe the judge is expecting. And then they're going to go through maybe a day or maybe half a day of like, final hearings and just kind of like, hey, listen, everybody knows the rules for court, everybody, blah, blah, any last minute things. And then they're going to be like, yo, let's break. And we're going to come back on Monday and we're going to start opening statements, right? It appears that, this is how I've always been told that federal court works. They operate really this after this after this. It's not a shit show. They try to operate on time and they try to be very, forthcoming. And if you don't bring it up before, it's not no last minute, like, chaotic shit.
Like for now, she'll be staying on as a prospective juror. But as far as just other jurors that were released, they were released either because they had time constraints. One juror, he just started a job like last week, so him being tied to a 2-month trial, the judge was like, okay, we're going to dismiss you and you're good to go. The other juror that was brought in for that sequestered question, but in the form of a sidebar in open court, that type of thing, she was excused for cause. Then the last juror I was in before I had to come out and do the hit with you, she was kind of talking about how she had watched the documentary, but she kind of had a lot of long pauses when the judge would ask her follow-up questions just about whether or not she could be fair and impartial, when particularly or possibly you could see one of the people who did either analysis or did speak to the documentary, that they could possibly be the ones to testify. And when the judge asked her,
All right.
today, but that could be completely different for tomorrow. But I was pretty surprised at how diverse everyone is, because when I go into that courtroom, I'm just seeing a bunch of lawyers, I'm seeing Diddy, I'm seeing other members of the press, but really you could tell that these were the people of New York. These are the people who are going to ultimately have to decide and judge whether or not Diddy is guilty of the charges that he faces or whether he's not. So we'll see what all happens with that. But again, a very, very diverse pool of jurors there, or prospective jurors.
And let me tell you, this is not an easy case to sit on. Put aside the fact that you're dealing with the celebrity factor and a lot of eyeballs are on it, and maybe a lot of pressure for this verdict, and 8 weeks, the hardship this might have. This is a complicated legal case. So when I heard a potential juror to say today, I don't really understand why it's the United States versus Sean Combs, as opposed to maybe a private individual going after Sean Combs. That's a little concerning. Now, we cover legal cases all the time. It might seem second place to us, but even reading the indictment, when I go through the specifics of racketeering or the specifics of sex trafficking, it's very complicated. That might work to the benefit of the defense. Maybe it works to the benefit of the prosecution. We shall see. But I'm very curious to see if you can have jurors who will actually fully, and this is not a slight on any potential jurors. It's just, this is a complicated case. And I wonder if they're going to be able to fully grasp and recognize and understand what the elements are of these crimes and what they're supposed to do. It's not an easy case, which brings me to my final question before I let you go, Elizabeth. From the best you could see, did the jurors, the prospective jurors, did they look nervous? Did they seem nervous? Did they seem concerned about being there, being a part of such a monumental case?
Not really, which is kind of surprising in the sense because when the jurors were kind of brought in and they were all brought in together, some were in the gallery, some were actually in the jury.
So Diddy's case or trial has finally started. They're picking out the jurors and stuff. Do you guys feel like Diddy will be freed, or you feel me, he's cooked? I've been reading a lot of comments. A lot of people have been saying that Diddy's cooked. You feel me? I don't even know how I necessarily feel about Diddy. Because, like, at first, everyone wanted him locked up. Then it's like, people kind of feel bad for him now. Because, I'm not gonna lie, the stuff he did to Cassie is 100% wrong. What he did to Cassie is 1,000% wrong. And people would never agree with it. But, like, if you want to call it for what it is, Diddy was a freak. Okay, if people underage are involved, lock him up, throw him under the jail. But if people underage aren't involved, bro, Diddy is a freak, bro. Like his lawyer said, he's a swinger, bro. Like you feel me? He might want to watch his wife get piped out. He might, you don't know what did he want to watch. He wants to watch everything. He's a freaky man. He's a freak. That's why they're called freak offs. Get all the freaks together. What do you think's gonna happen? Baby oil with stuff in it that when it goes into your skin, you're paralyzed. Like, yes, that's what happens at the freak off. There's obviously 2 parties to a Diddy party. There's the party, and then there's the party. Have you ever been invited to the party before? Probably not. But hey, man, let me know how you guys feel about Diddy. Do you want him locked up or do you want him free? Do you feel bad for Diddy? Even if Diddy gets freed, I think his career is done. No one's ever gonna work with him again. No brand's gonna work with him. You feel me? He's still gonna make money off. He probably has real estate, like tenants and stuff, and probably like investments that we don't know about. So it's probably still gonna make money, but he's not gonna be making the same money as before. Like, he's probably definitely at a billionaire status now. But hey, man, it's your boy Big X News. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and I'm out.